Wow, thank you very much. Professor Litokwampedi, the Karate Kid, who grew up to become the formidable Vice Chancellor and Principal of the great University of Johannesburg. Thank you. My distinguished discussants and panelists, let me begin by acknowledging communication specialist, accomplished member of the Fourth Estate, award-winning broadcast journalist, columnist, and National Planning Commissioner, Ms. Nikiwe Bigicha. I hope she is watching us online. She will join us later. I also wish to acknowledge the presence in our midst of Dr. Ruel Khoza, Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, business leader, corporate governance guru extraordinaire, and prolific author. Professor Baso Nzenze, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Program Director, Dr. Sifiso Mnisi, Head of the School of Communication at UJ, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of myself and Wasimioni, aka Mrs. Maluleke, and on behalf of all members of the Maluleke clan in the audience today, I salute you. Thank you for gracing us with your presence online and in the flesh tonight. On this cold evening, it warms my heart to be part of a gathering of knowledge seekers, knowledge lovers, summoned by a book. But first, the disclaimers. My book consists of 49 chapters, but it has nothing to do with the 49 South African refugees who recently landed in the USA. Completely coincidental. Secondly, although 7 times 7 is equal to 49, and 7 is rumored to be the biblical number of perfection and completeness, I can assure you that there is no secret Da Vinci Code embedded into the 49 chapter structure of my book. Even though one of the 49 chapters is a fervent letter straight from the heart of God to the heart of our former Chief Justice, Mogoeng. There is nothing quite as esoteric and mystical in the rest of the book, I promise you. Now, if you want, please start with that chapter on Mogoeng. And every time I meet with him, I change direction and run because of that chapter. Mine is a book premised on the rather mundane phenomenon of resilience, seeking to provide a kaleidoscopic, hopefully captivating, evocative, and thought-provoking profile of selected phases, and places of resilience, including those that pertain to my own short journey on Earth. Too short. One reviewer has already complained that I should write more about myself. Not sure about that. These offerings are served diachronically, synchronically, and eclectically, often on the border between fiction and non-fiction, and sometimes on the border between sanity and insanity, some of the chapters. Resilience is generally understood to mean the physical, mental, and spiritual strength to endure, to bounce back from, to adapt to, or to overcome severe situations of stress and disadvantage. Understood as such, resilience is a felt, known, and well understood phenomenon available to communities, societies, and nations for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. The formal academic study of resilience has been led by, predictably, developmental and child psychologists. However, the discipline of psychology neither discovered nor invented resilience. At the risk of oversimplification, the traditional research questions have generally included the following: why and how do some people, children or adults, handle and overcome stressful situations better than others? Under what conditions, material or psychological, does resilience emerge or thrive? Is resilience innate and embedded into the human psyche? Does resilience lurk deep in the ocean of collective human consciousness as a potential resource available to one and all who may simply reach out and touch it? Nowhere is resilience more palpable as a need, a net or a magnet, a source or a resource, than in individuals, groups, societies, and nations undergoing one upheaval or the other, whether such upheaval is short-term or for a lifetime, whether such upheaval is personal or interpersonal, communal or environmental, whether it is caused by a high-intensity war or low-intensity war, an epidemic or a pandemic, climate change, racism, colonialism, post-colonization, recolonization, patriarchy, gender-based violence, and so on and so forth. Many of the subjects of my book are born and bred in these kinds of situations of danger and adversity, hence the evocation of resilience. For without the challenge of adversity and difficulty, there is little to no resilience to speak about. My book is neither a textbook on resilience nor an academic investigation into the phenomenon, not even from the vantage point of any of the usual suspect disciplines that tend to dabble into that topic, such as anthropology, sociology, psychology, theology, and political science. Nor is my book a DIY resilience manual containing such topics as 7 steps to a lifestyle of resilience, or how to be resilient after divorce, or 7 mantras that will make you resilient one day at a time, or how to build resilient families. You will find no such formulas in the book. That is in part because not only is resilience contextual, but it is also not reducible to a packet of verbal vitamin pills for daily consumption. It is much more complex than that. Because adversity never retires. Human resilience is never a once and for all event for which we can design a formula. Resilience is a set of skills and responses that must be summoned again and again, each time differently. So, you'll find that in my book, the phenomenon of resilience is threaded through all the chapters, directly and indirectly, overtly and covertly, bluntly or nuanced. In the book, my weapon of choice is narrative, research, humor, polemics, memory, imagination, tragedy, and even lamentation. What I will call, for lack of a better phrase, literary evocation or even literary provocation. We need to be aware of binaries. Narrative is not the opposite of hard-nosed research, and no one explains this better than Toni Morrison when, in the prelude to her acceptance speech of the Nobel Literature Prize in 1993, she said, and I quote her, "Fiction has never been entertainment for me. It has been the work I have done for most of my adult life. I believe that one of the principal ways in which we acquire, hold, and digest information is via narrative." And so I hope you will understand when the remarks I make begin with what I believe to be the first sentence of our childhood that we all remember, that being the phrase, "Once upon a time." Once upon a time, there was an old woman, blind but wise. And so begins her lecture. I too start my book with a story of one such old woman of resilience, my grandmother. She who dragged me to school on my first day, literally dragged me to school. An illiterate old woman who later taught me not only the art of reading and writing letters for her, but also the art of reading life and writing life. Long before I was born, with a child on her back, my grandmother joined hundreds of fellow farm workers to work at the citrus plantations of New England, otherwise known as Nyongilandi, at the banks of the Levubu River in order to earn a living so she could bring up her children and her grandchildren. When my mother died, Grandma seamlessly became mother. She also enabled me to have a relationship with my dead mother, if that is possible at all. In the first chapter of the book, I recall the funeral of my mother, an event I inexplicably remember with the vivid clarity of a haunting dream. I then join her, my mother that is, in the last walk she undertook with her husband, my father. And I track and trace them through the landmarks of the rural village of my youth, all the way up to the D4, that strip of road that links Louis Trichardt to Malamulele village. And I also write about her collapse on the way back. And that's when grandmother had to take care of business. For my grandmother, resilience was neither a one-way traffic nor a monodirectional road. I saw her stand up to calamity after calamity. But I also saw her break, and I've seen her broken. Sometimes in the middle of mindlessly reading out aloud a letter to her, I would lift up my head to find my grandmother's face covered in tears. Thinking that perhaps I had misread or misspoken, I would say, "What's wrong, Grandma?" And amid sobs, she would say, "Keep reading the letter." She died in 2011, but not before coming to my house to inaugurate my living room into an ancestral shrine, the story with which I end the chapter on her. But my grandmother was not unique. Grandma Nketeleng Litunya Linka, the grandmother of the Vice Chancellor of UNISA, Professor Puleng Linkabula, was just the same. I interviewed her. The grandmother of the Auditor General, Prof Maluleke, Grandma Elina Mshengi Makubele, was also very similar. I also spoke to her, just like I interviewed Professor Mpedi. The grandmother, who was known as Ramadimeja Madisha, a quadriplegic, known to her grandchildren as Kukumma, amazingly brought up her grandson, Matlahulu Musa Mushabela, the current Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. She taught him, and I quote, how to herd her goats and cattle, to milk the cows, to cook, to think, to love, to laugh, to persevere, and to do life in general. And yet she was a quadriplegic, lying flat. She also told him to go and study medicine so he could come back and provide care and healing for her. Is there a nobler reason for studying to become a medical doctor than to go there in order to come back and heal your own grandmother? But I also suggest that Mushabela's grandmother redefined leadership. From that vantage position of lying flat, as she led her grandson and instructed him to bring the cattle home and to pass them in front of her so that she could count if they were all back. Another granny's child is the South African sports hero, Siya Kolisi. He himself says, and I quote, "There have been many important people in my life over the years, people who have guided and shaped me, but none more so than my grandmother. I called her auntie, and without her, I wouldn't be here." Think of Chilizi Marwala, the former vice-chancellor of this university, now a globally recognized expert in AI. He was inspired by his pot-making grandmother, Vochianelo, to become a mechanical engineer after he had observed how she goes about making pots. The musician with a golden voice, Vusi Mahlasela, child of a single parent, also thanks his grandmother, Mapechi Aida Mahlasela, for the person he has become. To make ends meet, Grandma Mahlasela operated a shebeen in Mamelodi. That shebeen was known as Hamamushwesh or Kosgodipola. The gramophone at his grandmother's shebeen opened a whole new world of music to young Mahlasela. From some of the shebeen patrons, Mahlasela learned and developed a taste for style. He probably has a little bit more style than you and I. He learned about stretched caps, two-tone shoes, Tellerina skirts, boot juice shoes, and stove-piped trousers. The other half of my childhood, as already mentioned by Prof, and it's all in the book, was spent in Middlelands Zone 8, beneath the artificial yellow mountains made out of mine dumps. There I was the tormented occupant of 1/3 of our family house, 3-roomed house. I occupied the kitchen, which doubled up as my bedroom, except that during weekends I couldn't sleep until my father and his drinking buddies had finished their drinking. They are dancing and they are singing. Their songs still haunt my sleep to this day. And then one day I landed a school holidays job at number 216 Bree Street where my father worked. And there I met the father I never knew I had. Instead of the assertive man he was among his friends and family at his Matchbox house in Soweto, the Prof Maluleke of 216 Bree Street was as meek as a lamb, even in the face of verbal abuse. On the homeward bound bus every evening, he would put his dops on and seamlessly transform into the father I knew. Whenever I tried to discuss the disrespect he endured at work, my father always changed the topic into a session about growing up, finishing school, getting a job, and holding it down. Was that resilience? Or was it all about the deployment of what political scientist James Scott calls the weapons of the weak? You will find in the book reflections on the tremendous roles of fathers. The father of Professor Tokomayekiso, the current Vice Chancellor of Mpumalanga University, who shaped her the father of Pamela Dube, Professor Pamela Dube, the current Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Technology. The father of Nelson Mandela, who he says, when his father died, he felt that he was cut adrift. He says that his father had a patch of gray hair, and he used to look for gray clay to paint his hair so that he looks like his father, even though he was much younger. The father of Chinua Achebe, about whom he writes. Chinua Achebe is the name of this venue. Yeah. And many, many other fathers. And yes, there is humor in the book. Humor is a powerful resource for resilience. The sense of humor of the Valdesia residents, that is the village in Limpopo where I grew up, in the face of enemies within and enemies from outside on the other side of the river, was just amazing. The missionaries distributed Bibles in the village. It was a mission station. And guess what the people used the Bible pages to do with? They took the Bible pages and used them as toilet paper. The missionaries also forbade the singing of traditional songs, especially the dancing. They didn't like the dancing. And what did the villagers say? The villagers say, you know, the only reason the missionaries do not allow sex before marriage is because they fear it might lead to traditional dancing. But sometimes even humor is not enough. When faced with adversity in life, resilience does not always help us win, certainly not in the short term. It does not always take us to the finish line, that is resilience. Sometimes adversity is greater than our grit and our tenacity, so that we are reduced to scraping from the bottom of our barrels of resilience. That is when the strategy of lament may be deployed. According to Catholic theologian Emmanuel Katongore, lament is the language we use to make sense out of senselessness, meaning out of suffering, humanity out of inhumanity, and hope out of hopelessness. There are several chapters of lament in my book, some of them rather heart-wrenching. There's a chapter titled A Country in the Shadow of the Valley of Death, which looks at how we survived COVID. There's a chapter on Anine Boysen of Bredasdorp, the 17-year-old girl who was raped and disemboweled and left to die by someone she knew. There's a chapter on Togozo Mayenziwe Xaba, killed by a lover. There's a chapter titled A Map of Our Bloody Country, which is an account of the litany of massacres, big and small, that our country has been through. There's a chapter on the country we are losing, where I pose as a funeral orator at the funeral of a famous liberation movement. For me, therefore, resilience is personal, it is communal, it is societal, it is environmental, and it encompasses the animal world too. In my essay titled Valdesia Fights Back, or the chapter titled Valdesia Fights Back, I portray and I conscript the rivers, the mountains, the valleys, the escarpments, the landmarks of that greater territory as part and parcel of the soldiers of resistance. Because the river sustained the community. The forest also sustained the community, but that forest was also being destroyed. And then there's a chapter on my dog, Bruno, that freedom fighter who will be dancing with Jesus when Jesus returns. At the end, I recall the stories that my grandmother told us, which is where my love for storytelling comes from. She told us this story, that long, long ago there was a madman, and this is I'm finishing now. Long, long ago there was a madman who lived in a remote village. With his trademark limp, the village madman would walk back and forth from one end of the village to the other, singing meaningless songs and mouthing incoherent sentences day and night. One hot summer day, during one of his aimless promenades, the madman passed a group of men swimming in the local lake. He noticed a heap of clothes belonging to the swimmers on the banks of the lake. Suddenly, in what he thought was a brilliant idea, the madman grabbed the heap of clothes, put them under his smelly armpit, and before the shocked swimmers could do anything, the madman sprinted away towards the neighboring village, taking their clothes with him. The swimmers faced a dilemma. Do they, in their nakedness, immediately exit the lake to pursue the fleeing madman in order to retrieve their clothes? Can you imagine them running after him shouting, "That man is mad, that man is mad," and people would look at them saying, "But you are naked, you must be the mad ones." Or do they stay in the water? If they chose to stay in the water, they would have to wait until sunset so that they could discreetly make their way home under cover of darkness. But there was another problem. The sacred traditions of the village prescribed that any adult found walking naked in the dead of night should immediately be put on trial on accusation of witchcraft, a crime for which the death penalty was applicable. So what do you think the swimmers should do? Grandma would ask us. We would disagree endlessly about the best course of action for the swimmers to take. I think the swimmers who ran after the madman, even though they were naked, if they took that option, would be like writers of memoirs. If they stayed in the water until it was dark, they would be writers of biographies. So you can work out which type I am. Let me say a quick word of thanks, Prof Mpedi, to your bomb squad, led by one Smangele Zwane. I don't know all the members of that bomb squad, but I know Reneka Pandey, Theodora Modise, and many others. There's also a TUT bomb squad, led by Ms. Papama Chisikawe. Once again, I will not mention each and every one in case I get into trouble for forgetting some of them. What a wonderful gift you have given to me. Thank you very much.